My mother committed a felony to buy my sister a new Mercedes. Then she sent me the bill. I'm Sarah, 29 years old, the person my family only called when they needed money. After they secretly held Christmas without me, my mother sent that bill, $52,000 for my sister's car, with a note. She deserves it. You have a responsibility to family. They had forged my signature. My hands are shaking. What do you even do when your own family does this to you? Listen to my story and tell me what you would have done. The January evening was settling over Manhattan with a quiet finality, the kind that only happens when the holiday chaos has finally bled away. Outside my 20th floor window, on the Upper East Side, fat, lazy snowflakes began their silent descent, dusting the city in a soft, forgiving light. The distant wail of a siren, a constant in the city's soundtrack, felt muted tonight, insulated by the snow and the thick glass. Inside, the old radiator hissed a gentle rhythm, a comforting sound in my pre-war apartment. The air still held the faint, bittersweet scent of the Douglas fir that had stood in the corner, a phantom of a Christmas I had spent mostly alone, catching up on work. I kicked off my heels, the soft click on the hardwood floor a satisfying sound of arrival. It had been another grueling 12-hour day of analyzing market trends, of living inside spreadsheets and projections. I walked to the kitchen, my kitchen, with its marble countertops I had chosen myself, and poured a generous glass of Napa Valley Chardonnay. The cool stem of the glass was a welcome sensation against my fingertips. Leaning against the counter, I looked out at the sprawling cityscape, a glittering tapestry of a million other lives, and felt a familiar, fragile sense of pride. This was mine, all of it. The view, the quiet, the independence, all earned every last bit of it. My gaze fell to the small pile of mail on the console table. The usual junk, credit card offers, catalogs for furniture I couldn't afford, even with my salary, the utility bill. But nestled amongst them was one outlier, a thick, letter-sized business envelope. It was made of heavy, expensive-feeling linen paper, the kind that signals importance. In the top left corner, embossed in a severe navy blue font, was the name of a law firm, and beneath it, an address in Greenwich, Connecticut. A cold knot of dread began to form in the pit of my stomach. My family didn't send business mail. My father, David, would just call with a blunt request to look over some investment portfolio. I picked it up. It felt heavier than it should, weighted with more than just paper. I told myself it was nothing, just Dad being unusually formal. But I knew with a certainty that chilled me more than the winter air, that the peace of my evening was over. The world I had so carefully built for myself was about to be torn apart. I carried the envelope and my wine to the sofa, the sound of the heavy paper sibilant in the quiet room. I used my thumb to tear it open, the rip sounding unnaturally loud. Inside there was no letter, no personal note, just a sheaf of official-looking documents stapled together. The top page was a contract. The iconic three-pointed star of the Mercedes-Benz logo seemed to leap off the page. My eyes scanned the text: vehicle purchase agreement, model Jill Coupe, color pearl white. And then I saw the number, circled in what looked like my father's aggressive red ink, $52,000. The breath caught in my throat. I read the lines again, my mind refusing to process the information. Buyer Chloe Evans. And then below it, on the line designated for the cosigner, was my name, Sarah Evans. In an A hand, cold and invisible, seemed to squeeze the air from my lungs. The room, which had felt spacious moments before, suddenly felt claustrophobic and small. It didn't make sense. I'd never been to a Mercedes dealership. I hadn't spoken to Chloe in 3 weeks. This had to be a joke, a mistake, a bizarre marketing gimmick. Was I losing my mind? The numbers on the page seemed to swim, dancing mockingly before my eyes, a cruel taunt to the financial analyst who prided herself on order and logic. There was no logic here, only a growing, screaming void of disbelief. And then I saw it, the thing that shattered the disbelief and replaced it with pure, cold horror. At the bottom of the last page, on the signature line next to my printed name, was a signature. It was a pathetic, trembling imitation of my own handwriting. The loops were too round. The slant was wrong. It was a forgery, a blatant, insulting, and illegal assassination of my identity. My hands were shaking now, rattling the papers. Tucked behind the contract was a single, smaller piece of paper. It was my mother's personal stationery, the heavy, cream-colored cardstock from Crane & Co. that she used for her charity gala invitations. Her handwriting, usually a graceful, flowing script, looked sharp and severe. The ink bled into the expensive paper like a fresh wound. "And in your dearest Sarah," it began. "In dearest Sarah, Aunt Chloe has had a difficult year, and she deserves this. Family helps family. You have a responsibility to take care of us. We know you'll do the right thing. And love, Mom. And love, Mom." The 2 words were the cruelest cut of all. There was no explanation, no request. It was a command disguised as affection. A verdict delivered without a trial. The words, "You have a responsibility," were pressed so hard into the paper, I could feel the indentation. I wasn't her daughter. I was a financial instrument, an ATM, a solution. My success, my hard work, my entire life had been reduced to a single ugly purpose: to fund their whims. The wineglass slipped from my numb fingers, but I didn't register the sound of it shattering on the hardwood floor. The contract and my mother's note fluttered from my lap, landing face up. I slumped back into the cushions, staring at my own hands, the hands that worked 80-hour weeks, the hands that built this life. It was all for nothing. So the image of that pearl-white SUV, gleaming and arrogant, burned behind my eyes. But as it burned, another image surfaced, pushing its way through 13 years of memories. It was a different car, a 1998 Honda Accord, a dull beige color with a permanent dent in the passenger side door and the faint, lingering smell of mildew and old coffee. My 16th birthday present. And the past rushed in, a tidal wave of carefully ignored injustices. And suddenly, I was 16 again, standing in the cold, cavernous garage of our Greenwich home, learning for the first time what my true value was. In the cold silence of my Manhattan apartment, surrounded by the shards of a shattered wineglass and a shattered life, the present faded away. The glossy contract for a pearl-white Mercedes dissolved into a memory. A high-definition replay of a past I had tried so hard to outrun. The past always has a way of catching up. Mine arrived in the form of a beige 1998 Honda Accord. Sen and I can still feel the damp chill of our Greenwich garage on my 16th birthday. It was a stark contrast to the scene from 2 years prior, for Chloe's 16th. For her, my parents had rented out a ballroom at the Greenwich Country Club. I remember the shimmering gold and pink balloons, the catered cocktail food, the pop music thumping from professional speakers, and parked right out front, tied with a ridiculously large red bow, was a brand new cherry red Audi A4 convertible. Her friends, all from the same expensive private schools, had shrieked with a practiced, performative delight. It was a spectacle. On my 16th birthday was a transaction. There was no party, just a standard weeknight dinner of Costco rotisserie chicken and a bagged salad. Afterwards, my father, David, led me to the garage. Under the harsh fluorescent lights sat the Honda. It was my Aunt Patricia's old car, with a persistent dent in the passenger door and over 100,000 miles on the odometer. He tossed the keys to me. The keychain was a faded plastic fob from a gas station. "On, there you go," he'd said, clapping me on the shoulder with a heavy, dismissive hand. "It's a good car, great gas mileage. You need to learn about practicality, Sarah." In my mother, Eleanor, stood by, arms crossed, a thin, placid smile on her face. "You're the smart one, Sarah," she added, her voice smooth as silk. "You don't need flashy things to impress people." And even then, a small part of me knew it wasn't a compliment. It was a label, a cage. It was their justification, the neat and tidy story they told themselves, so they didn't have to feel guilty. Chloe was the beautiful, spirited one who needed to be adorned. I was the smart, practical one who needed to be functional. My near-perfect SAT scores, the reason I thought I might deserve something special, were ironically used as the reason I didn't need it. I was a consolation prize to myself. Back then, I didn't have the words for the injustice, only the hollow, aching feeling of it in my chest. Tonight, staring at a $52,000 bill for Chloe, I finally had the words. It was a map of injustice, and I had been navigating it my entire life. On the map had many landmarks. I remember the day the thick envelope from Cornell University arrived. I'd torn it open with trembling hands, my heart pounding as I read the words, "Congratulations, full academic scholarship, economics program." A full ride to the Ivy League. It was my golden ticket, the culmination of years of late-night studying, of sacrificing my social life, of relentless, single-minded focus. I ran to the phone, my voice shaking with excitement as I dialed home. Soon my father answered. The familiar droning sound of a CNBC anchor was loud in the background. "Soon, Dad, I got into Cornell with a full scholarship." And there was a pause. I could hear the anchor talking about the Dow Jones Industrial Average. "Cornell," my father finally said, his voice flat. "That's good. That'll save us a fair bit of money." He didn't say congratulations. He didn't say he was proud. He asked me if I'd seen the latest tech stock reports, then said he had to take another call. The conversation was over. My monumental achievement had been reduced to a line item on their budget, a cost saved. A few months later, Chloe, who had barely managed to graduate from her private high school, decided she wanted to major in art history at Sarah Lawrence, a notoriously expensive liberal arts college. Her acceptance was celebrated with a lavish dinner at a prime steakhouse in the city. My parents toasted her for following her passion and embracing her creative soul. My full scholarship was practicality. Her $250,000 tuition, paid for by them, was a noble investment in a Tetra spiritual journey. I sat there picking at my overpriced steak, feeling invisible. The rules were clear. My success was measured in dollars saved, while her whims were measured in romantic ideals. In that pattern, once established, became the blueprint for our relationship after I graduated and moved to the city. My hard-earned independence wasn't a source of pride for them. It was a new resource to be tapped. The first time it happened, I was barely a month into my first job at the bank. The ink on my first real paycheck was barely dry. My mother called, her voice a warm, sweet honey. "And Sarah, darling," she'd begun, "I need a little favor. Chloe's gotten herself into a bit of a mess with her credit cards. It's $12,000. I know it's a lot, but she's just young and naive. You know how she is." A pause. "You're different, Sarah. You've always been the responsible one. The rock of this family." So the rock of this family. I clung to those words. For the first time, I felt needed not for my practicality, but for my strength. I felt like a hero. I logged in to my brand new online banking account and transferred the money, almost all of my savings, without a second thought. It felt good. It felt like I was finally earning my place. The feeling didn't last. 6 months later, I was scrolling through Instagram, and there was Chloe. Not in her cramped apartment, but poolside at a luxury resort in Bali. In one photo, she was holding a cocktail, wearing a new designer bikini and sunglasses. In another, she was showing off a new Louis Vuitton handbag. The caption read, "Living my best life, you're blessed." And I felt a cold, sickening lurch in my stomach. I called my mother, my voice tight. I thought Chloe was in debt. "You know that," Eleanor said, her voice breezy and dismissive. "Her new boyfriend paid for the trip. He adores her. Don't be so hard on your sister, Sarah. You're lucky you don't have to worry about money." And there it was again, the label, the cage. My financial discipline wasn't a virtue. It was a Yutong-Lucken that disqualified me from empathy. The first dose of poison, the slow-acting betrayal, began to seep into my system. It was a lesson I would be forced to learn over and over again. I'm sitting in my apartment, the shattered glass crunching softly under my shoe as I shifted. I saw it all with a terrible, crystalline clarity. The Honda, the scholarship, the credit card debt. They weren't isolated incidents. They were points on a map, charting a course of exploitation that led directly to this moment, to this fraudulent contract lying on my floor. And so what was it all for? The late nights, the sacrificed weekends, the relentless drive. Was it all just to become a more efficient ATM, a more convenient financial solution for them? My Cornell degree wasn't a symbol of my intelligence on their wall. It was a certification of my earning potential. And my heart, which had so desperately craved their love and approval, was nothing more than a soft spot for them to press when they needed to make a withdrawal. The answer to my own bitter question, what was it all for, was written in the lonely, relentless years that followed my move to New York. I'd run to the city seeking independence, but I'd only built a more gilded cage for myself, one where my success was measured by how much my family could take. On my first years in Manhattan were a blur. As a junior analyst at a major investment bank, I was a small cog in a massive machine. 80-hour work weeks weren't a sign of ambition. They were the price of admission. My life ran on black coffee from the office Keurig and takeout salads eaten at my desk at 10 p.m., my face illuminated by the cold glow of a Bloomberg terminal. My first apartment was a cramped studio in Hell's Kitchen, a tiny box that was my only sanctuary from the city's demands. And while my college friends posted photos of their travels and engagements, my only long-term relationship was with my portfolio. I funneled every spare dollar into my 401k and a series of index funds, telling myself that financial independence was a shield. It would be an impenetrable fortress to protect me from their judgment. I was wrong. The shield wasn't for me. It was for them to hide behind. They never saw the late nights or the solitude. They only saw the bottom line of my bank statements. In the requests for money began as a trickle and soon became a deluge. The calls always came when I was most exhausted. It would be my father, his voice brisk. "Sarah, I need $20,000. tech startup, ground floor opportunity. Or my mother, her voice a weaponized sigh. The charity gala needs a sponsor, darling. We put you down for a table. It's for a good cause after all. And always there was Chloe. Car repairs, rent, a new laptop. And every time I hesitated, my mother would deploy her sharpest tool. I'm so disappointed, Sarah. After everything we've sacrificed for you, you're quibbling over money with your own family. Tiens, in guilt. It always worked. That carefully instilled sense of eternal debt was their master key to my bank account. I would close my eyes and click Confirm Transfer. The quiet chime of the transaction feeling like a defeat. In the absolute peak of this exploitation came last year. My parents bought a sprawling summer home in the Hamptons, a place they insisted they needed. They threw a lavish party I only saw on Facebook. 2 months later, my father called me. It's Nina Sarah here, he said, no preamble. We're in a bit of a tight spot. We need you to cover the property tax bill on the Greenwich house. It's $15,000 dawai. And for the first time, I pushed back, my voice trembling. Why me? You just bought a house in the Hamptons. Cowie. And his voice turned to ice. Don't take that tone. Who do you think paid for the education that got you where you are? It was our investment. Consider this part of the return on that investment. And return on investment. The word struck me with the force of a physical blow. I wasn't his daughter. I was an asset, a stock that had performed well. I paid the bill, but as the money left my account, I felt a vital part of me go with it. A final flickering flame of hope extinguished. Is and I hung up the phone and walked numbly from my desk to the women's restroom. I locked myself in a stall and cried. Not loud, heaving sobs, but silent, hot tears that streamed down my face. I was crying for the girl who just wanted her dad to be proud, and for the woman who had just been told she was nothing more than a balance sheet. Sene's soft knock came on the stall door. Sarah, you in there? It was Leah, my friend and the only other analyst who stayed as late as I did. Ian and I hastily wiped my eyes. I'm fine, I choked out. And the door creaked. Leah didn't try to come in. She just slid a paper cup of water along the cool tile floor. Her voice was quiet, free of pity. Hey, my mom's making lasagna on Friday night. You should come over. Onanai stared at the simple paper cup, a tiny offering in the vastness of my despair. A cup of water, an invitation. It was the first lifeline I'd been thrown in years, and I grabbed onto it as if I were drowning. In that Friday, I took the F train to Brooklyn, a journey that felt like crossing into another country. The imposing, sterile world of Greenwich gave way to the warm, lived-in brownstones of Park Slope. As I walked up the steps to Leah's building, I could hear laughter spilling from an open window, a sound as foreign to me as a forgotten language. And the door flew open before I could ring. Leah's mother, Maria, a bustling woman with a smile that crinkled the corners of her kind eyes, pulled me into a hug. It wasn't the stiff air kiss my own mother favored. It was a real enveloping hug that smelled of garlic and home. Aunt Sarah, you made it, sweetie, she exclaimed. Come in, you look too thin. We need to feed you. And their apartment was the antithesis of my parents' house. The Greenwich home was a silent museum of beige perfection. The Rossi home was wonderfully, unapologetically alive. Books overflowed from shelves, framed family photos crowded every surface, and a comfortable, slightly worn sofa invited you to sink in. It was a home, not a showroom. Maria led me to the dining table, and without asking about my job or my year-end bonus, she ladled a huge portion of lasagna onto my plate and ask the only question that mattered. Extra Parmesan. And for the first time in as long as I could remember, I sat at a family dinner table without feeling like I was being evaluated. I wasn't the investment banker or the responsible daughter. I was just Sarah. And for them, that was enough. And during dinner, Leah's father, Sal, a carpenter with strong, kind hands, asked me what I did for fun. The question startled me. I eventually told him about a small pro bono project I'd taken on, helping a local animal shelter organize their finances. I expected his eyes to glaze over, the way my own father's did. And instead, Sal put down his fork and listened. When I finished, he nodded slowly. "That's a wonderful thing, Sarah," he said, his voice deep and sincere. "Using your skills to help others. Your parents must be very proud of you." Senin proud. The word landed with the force of a physical blow. It was an emotion I had only read about in books. I felt a stinging in my eyes and quickly looked down at my plate, studying the layers of pasta as if they held some great secret. Under the table, Leah's hand found mine and gave it a quick, comforting squeeze. She knew they didn't need to know my story, they just saw me. Even later, as Leah walked me to the subway station, the cold night air felt crisp and clean. "I don't know what's going on, Sarah," she said quietly, "but I want you to know our door is always open. You're not alone in this." She wasn't offering solutions. She was offering a safe harbor. And on the rattling train ride back to my silent Manhattan apartment, a devastating realization settled over me. I felt more at home in that noisy Brooklyn brownstone than I ever had in the house I grew up in. The knowledge was both liberating and heartbreaking. And the warmth from that evening lingered through the next morning. I woke up feeling lighter, a sliver of hope wedged in my heart. Then my phone buzzed on the nightstand, a harsh, intrusive sound. It was a text from Chloe. On the screen lit up, and the warmth of the previous night vanished. "Hey sis, need $500 ASAP, emergency." And the fragile hope inside me cracked. But this time, something was different. The evening in Brooklyn had shown me what was possible, what I was missing. In a moment of desperate, foolish optimism, I decided I would try one last time to get it from my own family. I would fight for it. And I texted back, my hands trembling. "Forget the money. I'm booking you all a weekend in Manhattan, my treat. We need to spend time together." Fueled by the warmth of my evening in Brooklyn, I embarked on a mission. It was a foolish, optimistic, and incredibly expensive mission to prove that my family could, in fact, love me for me. I called it Chagger the Evans Family Manhattan Weekend. A meticulously planned fantasy, designed to force them into a corner of gratitude. And the planning became an obsession. I wasn't just organizing a trip, I was architecting a perfect memory. I booked them a 2-bedroom suite at the Pierre, with sweeping views of Central Park. I secured 4 impossible-to-get orchestra seats for the hit Broadway show my mother had been mentioning for months. I made a dinner reservation at Daniel, the 2 Michelin star restaurant my father always name-dropped to impress his colleagues. The final bill for the hotels, tickets, and reservations climbed to nearly $10,000, a sum I justified as an investment in my emotional well-being. It was a terrible investment. It and I deep-cleaned my apartment until it gleamed, scrubbing away any sign of a life lived in haste. I bought a large bouquet of white Casablanca lilies, my mother's favorite, and arranged them in a vase on the coffee table. I even prepared a small welcome reception with champagne and artisanal cheeses. The hopeful, naive part of me, the part that refused to die, pictured my mother's surprised delight, my father's impressed nod, maybe even a genuine smile from Chloe. I was setting a stage for a breakthrough, hoping they would finally see my success not as a resource, but as something to be proud of. And they arrived on a Friday afternoon, and my carefully constructed fantasy began to crumble within minutes. My mother, Eleanor, swept into the apartment, her eyes scanning the room with the critical gaze of a property appraiser. She didn't hug me. She ran a single manicured finger across the marble countertop. "Oh, Sarah, you're still in this place," she remarked, her voice flat. "Yeah, it's smaller than I remembered, and the view," she added, peering out the window. You can see all those dreadful rooftop water towers." My father, David, barely acknowledged me, already on his phone, muttering about market volatility. I had booked them a suite at one of the finest hotels in the world. He was worried about the Dow Jones. Chloe flopped onto my sofa, not even bothering to take off her coat. "The train ride from Greenwich was brutal, hun," she announced to no one in particular. "What's the Wi-Fi password?" There was no thank you for the champagne, no compliment on the lilies. My grand gesture, my $10,000 olive branch, was met with an immediate wave of complaints and dismissive indifference. It wasn't just that they didn't appreciate the effort, it was as if they didn't even see it. It was simply their due. Our dinner at Daniel was a masterclass in my family's dysfunction. The restaurant was magnificent, a hushed temple of haute cuisine. But the atmosphere at our table was anything but refined. It became the Chloe show. My sister, propped up by my money in a city she claimed to adore, held court. She spoke endlessly about her grand plans to become a lifestyle influencer, a career path that seemed to involve little more than taking aesthetically pleasing photos of things other people paid for. She pontificated on the importance of authenticity and living your truth, a lecture made profoundly ironic by the fact that her truth was funded entirely by my very practical, spreadsheet-driven life. Is and I tried a few times to steer the conversation. I mentioned a major deal I had helped close at work, a complex acquisition I was proud of. Before I could even finish my second sentence, my mother waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, Sarah, let's not talk about work at the table," she said, a hint of disdain in her voice. "It's so dreadfully boring." Anna and I fell silent. My father chimed in, only to correct the sommelier on his wine pairing suggestion. I sat there, invisible, in a $1,000 dress, at a dinner I was paying for, listening to my sister describe her knee-brand strategic, while my parents nodded along, captivated. I was an unwilling silent producer of my own family's play. The weekend concluded. I stood on the curb of Fifth Avenue, the doorman holding the door to the black limousine I had hired to take them back to Greenwich. It was the final expensive flourish on a weekend of utter failure. My mother gave me one of her stiff air kisses. My father was already on his phone again. Then, just as she was about to get in the car, Chloe pulled me aside. "Sentiut. Thanks for the weekend, sister," she said, her eyes already scanning the street for someone more interesting to look at. Her voice was casual, almost an afterthought. "Oh, by the way," she added, turning back to me, "I'm about 2,000 short on rent for next month." And I just stared at her. The sheer unmitigated audacity of it left me speechless. After all this, the hotel, the show, the dinner, the limo, her parting shot was another request, another withdrawal. Sis and I didn't answer. I just held her gaze for a long, silent moment. Then, without a word, I turned and walked away. The sound of the limousine door closing behind me like a final definitive slam. I didn't answer her follow-up text that evening. I didn't answer her call the next day. For the first time in my life, I chose silence. That silence was the first crack in the dam, the first small, quiet drop of water that would eventually lead to the flood. And my silence after that weekend was a new and unfamiliar weapon. I ignored Chloe's texts asking for rent money. I let my mother's calls go to voicemail. For 2 weeks, I existed in a fragile, self-imposed exile, clinging to the hope that my absence might, for once, be noticed. I told myself it was a test. I should have known my family had never been interested in passing tests. They only wrote them. Then the breaking point arrived not with a bang, but with the quiet scroll of a thumb on a Sunday afternoon. It was December 15th, a gray, miserable day that matched my mood. I was aimlessly flicking through Instagram stories, a mindless distraction from the gnawing emptiness in my apartment. And then I saw it. It was a post from my cousin, Ryan. The photo was a punch to the gut. It was my entire extended family, my parents, Chloe, my aunts, uncles, and all my cousins, posed and smiling in front of the towering Christmas tree in my parents' Greenwich living room. The room was decorated to perfection, just as it was every year. The fire was roaring. Everyone was dressed in festive reds and greens. My father had his arm around my mother. Chloe was beaming, holding a glass of champagne. Even Winston, their golden retriever, was in the shot, wearing a ridiculous reindeer antler headband. The caption read, "Early Evans Family Christmas. So wonderful to have everyone together." Everyone, except me. My phone felt impossibly heavy in my hand. I zoomed in, my finger tracing over their smiling faces, searching for a sign that I was mistaken, that I was somehow hidden in the back. But I wasn't there. They had erased me. In a single cheerful photograph, they had declared to the world that their family was complete without me. My heart didn't just break. It felt like it had been surgically removed, leaving a cold, gaping hole in my chest. And my hands were shaking so violently, I could barely press the numbers, but I called my mother. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of betrayal and rage. She answered on the third ring, her voice sickeningly cheerful. Sarah, I was just about to call you, darling." And I saw the picture, I said, my own voice a stranger's, low and tight. "For the Christmas party." And there was a beat of silence on the other end, a silence so profound I could almost hear the gears turning in her head as she fabricated a lie. "It's so that, she finally said, forcing a light, airy laugh. "That was just a spur-of-the-moment thing, sweetie. A few people just happened to drop by. We figured you were so busy with work in the city, we didn't want to bother you." Ik anyway, clumsy, insulting lie. A spur-of-the-moment's party with 20 people, all perfectly dressed for the occasion. The excuse was so transparent, it was a declaration of her contempt for my intelligence. In the background, I could hear a faint sound, Chloe giggling. The sound cut through me like a shard of glass. My mother must have sensed my silence, because her tone shifted. She lowered her voice into a conspiratorial whisper, the one she always used when she was about to deliver the final manipulative blow. "And besides," she said softly, "you know, Chloe has been a bit sensitive lately. With you here, she would have felt overshadowed. You've always been the strong one, Sarah." "The strong one." The phrase echoed in the hollow space where my heart used to be. And in that moment, 29 years of confusion, of trying to be good enough, of swallowing my own pain to accommodate theirs, suddenly snapped into a terrible, perfect focus. Knit wasn't a compliment, it was a permission slip. A permission slip for them to neglect me, because the strong one doesn't need attention. A permission slip for them to exploit me, because the strong one can handle the burden. A permission slip for them to hurt me over and over again, because the strong one doesn't feel pain. They had used my resilience against me, turning my greatest strength into my deepest vulnerability. I was strong so I could be ignored. I was strong so I could be forgotten. Ian and I hung up the phone. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't scream or cry. I just pressed the red button on my screen, severing the connection. In a rage, cold and clear as a winter sky, rose up inside me. It wasn't the hot, blinding anger of a tantrum. It was the focused, glacial fury of a person who had finally seen the absolute truth. The charade was over. The desperate hope for their love and approval was dead, and I had just watched them lower it into the ground. Is and I would not be attending the official Christmas gathering. I would not be sending a gift. I would not let them make me invisible ever again. And my fingers, no longer shaking, moved with a new and unfamiliar purpose across my phone's screen. I found Leah's name in my contacts and pressed call. She answered immediately. "Itidi, hey, what's up?" And I took a breath, my voice steady and calm in a way that scared even me. "Hey, that invitation for Christmas, is it still open?" "Nisin, of course, always," she said, a note of concern in her voice. "Are you okay, Tinukar?" "Intins, I am now, Har," I said, and then I made the declaration that would change everything. I'll be there. That decision wasn't about where I would eat turkey and open presents. It was a tectonic shift in the landscape of my life. I wasn't just choosing a different location for the holidays. I was choosing a different family. X and I see 3 paths ahead of me. The first is the path of absolute justice. I report the forgery to the police. My mother could face criminal charges. It's the clean, righteous path, but it might destroy her. Isn't the second path is civil. I fight it through the bank, proving the fraud, forcing them to take back the car. They would face public humiliation and financial consequences, but not jail time. It's a warning shot, not a fatal blow. Stun, the third path is the one I've always known, the path of silence. I could pay the $52,000, swallow this final injustice as the price for my freedom, and sever them from my life forever. It's the quickest path to peace, but the cost makes me sick. Son, so I'm asking you, if you were sitting here in my chair, looking at this history of being used, what would you do? Which path is justice, and which one is peace? Let me know what you think. I could really use the advice. X and I didn't call, I drove. On a cold, bright Saturday afternoon, I left the city behind and pointed my car toward Greenwich. I didn't warn them I was coming. I knew their tactics. An announcement would have given them time to prepare, to align their stories, to sharpen their weapons of guilt and manipulation. Today, there would be no preparation, only reckoning. Sitanays. I turned onto the long, familiar gravel driveway of my childhood home. The crunch of the stones under my tires sounded like applause for a battle about to begin. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs, but my hands were steady on the steering wheel. The fear was still there, a ghost haunting the edges of my resolve, but it no longer had control. I was not the little girl desperate for their approval. I was not the young woman willing to pay any price for a scrap of affection. I was a creditor coming to collect a debt that had nothing to do with money. Ian and I parked my car and walked to the massive, dark wood front door, a door I had walked through thousands of times. But this time was different. I wasn't coming home. I was here to reclaim my own life. I pressed the doorbell, the loud melodic chime echoing through the house, a formal announcement of my arrival. As my mother, Eleanor, opened the door, the look on her face, a fleeting mask of confusion, quickly replaced by polite, strained surprise, was worth the drive alone. Hinamai. Sarah, what a surprise, she said, pulling her cashmere cardigan tighter around herself. You should have called, intil. Nika de Noel, I said, stepping past her into the grand silent foyer. That was the point. Ed and I walked directly into the living room. It was exactly as I pictured, a scene of domestic tranquility. My father was sunk into his favorite leather armchair, watching a golf tournament on the enormous television. Chloe was sprawled on the sofa, scrolling listlessly through her phone. The room was warm from the fireplace, comfortable, and completely oblivious to the storm that was about to break. Ines, turn it off, I said. My voice was calm, but it cut through the air with an authority that made my father flinch and reach for the remote. The sudden silence was deafening. Itz and I didn't sit. I stood. In the center of the room, on the expensive oriental rug, I became the focal point. I reached into my purse and pulled out 2 documents. The first was the fraudulent contract for the Mercedes. The second was a multi-page spreadsheet I had printed out, my indictment. Getting we need to talk, Iquar, I said, my voice as cold and steady as the winter air outside. They all stared at me, their faces a mixture of irritation and curiosity. Annie and I held up the spreadsheet. I call this the Evans account, I began. A summary of my financial contributions to this family over the past 5 years. I didn't let them interrupt. For the first time in my life, I held the floor. It is $12,000 to pay off Chloe's credit card debt. I looked at my sister, whose face was beginning to pale. $20,000 for Dad's sure-thing tech startup that vanished a month later. I looked at my father, who was now sitting bolt upright, his face darkening. Shinson, $15,000 to pay the property taxes on this house right after you bought a second home in the Hamptons. I looked at my mother, whose polite smile had frozen into a brittle mask. Hinty. And now, I said, my voice dropping slightly, a $52,000 for a Mercedes GLA Coupe, a car I never saw, for a loan I never agreed to, authorized with a signature that I never signed. And I let the words hang in the suffocating silence. I watched the realization dawn on their faces. This wasn't a plea. It wasn't a negotiation. It was a prosecution. Young Chloe, predictably, was the first to break. "Oh my God, you are being so dramatic," she shrieked, jumping to her feet. It's just money. Why do you always have to make everything about money?" Enan. "Because it was never just money, Chloe," I shot back, my voice rising for the first time. "It was the only language you people ever used with me." My father stood up, his face now a dangerous shade of crimson. "How dare you?" he boomed, taking a step toward me. "How dare you come into this house and speak to us like this after everything we've done for you?" Knit was his go-to line, his ultimate weapon. But today, the weapon was a dud. In and I didn't flinch. I looked him straight in the eye. "Vor after everything you've done for me? Or after everything I've done for you?" I took the Mercedes contract and threw it onto the polished surface of the coffee table. The paper skidded and came to a rest in front of him. "Namaskar," I said, my voice low and clear. "Ruru is fraud, and it ends here, now." And the look on their faces was a sight I would cherish for the rest of my life. The smug entitlement, the casual arrogance, it all melted away, replaced by the raw, ugly shock of cornered animals. The puppet had just cut its own strings, and the puppeteers were horrified. On my father, his face contorted with a rage born of lost control, played his final card. He pointed a trembling finger at me, his voice a guttural roar. "If you don't pay for that car," he snarled, "if you cause a scene over this, then you can consider yourself no longer a part of this family. We're done." Knit was meant to be the ultimate threat, the nuclear option, banishment. For 29 years, the fear of that threat had governed my every action. But hearing it spoken aloud, I felt no pain, no fear, no devastation. I felt nothing. And then something else, a profound, unexpected, and utterly glorious sense of release. Tanae's slow, genuine smile spread across my face for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. I looked at his furious, desperate face, and I felt a wave of pity for him. "Thank you, Dad," I said, my voice soft and sincere. "That's the kindest gift you've ever given me." And with that, I turned my back on them, on the silent, stunned faces of my mother and sister, on the sputtering, impotent rage of my father. I walked out of the living room, through the grand foyer, and out the front door, and I didn't look back once. The drive back to Manhattan from Greenwich was strangely quiet. The furious, triumphant energy of the confrontation had faded, leaving behind a hollow sense of exhaustion. My father's final words, no longer a part of this family, echoed in my head, not as a threat, but as a quiet, definitive click of a door locking behind me. I felt liberated, but also profoundly adrift. I had won the battle, but in doing so, I had officially become an orphan. In the following Monday morning, I walked in the sleek, midtown Manhattan office of Natalie Hoffman. She was a lawyer Leah had recommended, a woman with sharp, intelligent eyes and a handshake that radiated competence. Her office overlooked the city, a view of power and order. I laid out my story, my voice steady, presenting the spreadsheet, the fraudulent contract, and the timeline of events not as a wounded daughter, but as a client presenting a case. She listened without interruption, her expression unreadable. When I finished, she looked me directly in the eye. "Miss Evans, she said, her voice firm and clear. "Let's be precise. This is not a family squabble. This is credit fraud, identity theft, and forgery. You have every legal right to take action." And hearing those words from a professional was the validation I never knew I needed. It was an anchor in the storm of my emotions. I wasn't being dramatic. I wasn't being ungrateful. I was a victim of a crime, and I had the right to defend myself. And my family, unsurprisingly, did not go quietly into the night. When their calls and texts went unanswered, they escalated. They drew the battle lines. The first attack came from Chloe. She launched a social media campaign, posting tearful filtered selfies with long captions about her genuine toxic, ungrateful sister who had abandoned the family in their time of need. It was a masterful performance of victimhood. Then my mother began her telephone offensive, calling relatives and her wide circle of friends from the charity circuit, spinning a tale of a selfish, money-obsessed daughter who had been corrupted by city life. The narrative was simple and effective. I was the villain. The worst, however, came from my father. He called one of my former bosses, a man I respected deeply, and attempted to poison my professional reputation, hinting at my instability. It was a cruel, desperate move, designed to hit me where I was most vulnerable. It hurt deeply, but their campaign of lies did something they never intended. It cauterized the wound. It showed me, with brutal clarity, that their knowledge was entirely conditional. It existed only as long as I was compliant and useful. Sheinen. The final ugly truth arrived via a series of text messages from Chloe late one Friday night. They were rambling, typo-ridden, and reeked of cheap wine and expensive resentment. "Hun, you think you're so much better than us, don't you, Sarah? Hun, sitting up there in your sad little apartment. Everyone knows Dad paid for everything." And then the knockout punch. You think anyone actually likes you? We only ever put up with you because of your money. You're a pathetic cash cow." Isken cash cow. The words glowed on my screen, ugly and undeniable. And as I read them, I felt no pain. All the guilt, all the lingering shreds of misplaced loyalty, all of it just evaporated. That cruel, drunken text was a gift. It was the final permission slip I needed to do what I should have done long ago. It was the key that unlocked my cage. The next morning, I woke up with a quiet, unwavering sense of purpose. I made my coffee, and with a steady hand, I called Natalie Hoffman. "Either Natalie, it's Sarah Evans," I said when she answered. We're moving forward." "Inte kuhinangan." "With which option?" she asked, her voice all business. Kurl and I looked out my window at the city, my city, the one I had built for myself. "For all of them," I said. A formal letter was drafted and sent to my parents' lawyer and to the legal department at Mercedes-Benz, officially reporting the fraud and demanding my name be removed from the loan. The gears of justice, slow but powerful, had begun to turn. And at the same time, I made another call to a therapist Leah had recommended. It was time to begin my own journey, the one toward healing. The fallout from my stand was swift and decisive. Faced with irrefutable evidence of fraud and the very real threat of criminal prosecution, my family's united front shattered. Their lawyer contacted Natalie within days. There was no fight, no denial, just a panicked scramble to contain the damage. The pearl-white Mercedes was quietly repossessed by the dealership, and my mother, through her attorney, offered a settlement agreement. It and I accepted, but on my terms. There were 3 conditions. First, they were to reimburse me for every cent of my legal fees. Second, they had to provide a formal written admission of the forgery, a copy of which would be held by my lawyer. And third, the most important condition of all, they were to sign a legally binding no-contact agreement. They were never to call, text, email, or approach me again. A week later, a FedEx package arrived. Inside was a check for my legal fees and a single sheet of paper. It was a letter, typed on my mother's expensive stationery, containing a stilted, legally vetted apology. Reading it, I felt no joy, no triumphant vindication, just a profound, hollow emptiness. The victory was bittersweet. It tasted like loss, like the final necessary amputation of a diseased limb. But it was necessary. It was the price of peace. And that peace, however, wasn't a destination, it was a journey. The weeks that followed were quiet, but the silence in my head was deafening. The echoes of 29 years of conditioning, the guilt, the feeling of responsibility, the desperate need for approval, didn't just vanish. I had won the war, but now I had to learn how to live in the aftermath. So my first step was starting therapy. In a quiet, sunlit office in a building not far from my own, I began the slow, painful work of unpacking my past. With a kind, patient therapist, I learned to identify the invisible wounds. I learned that my strength had been used as a weapon against me, and that it was okay to be vulnerable. I learned how to say monok, without feeling a crushing wave of guilt. I learned that my value as a person had absolutely nothing to do with my bank account, my job title, or the approval of people who claimed to love me. It was a slow, arduous process of untangling the knots that had bound me for so long. As I began to heal, something unexpected happened. The family I had lost was slowly replaced by one that was quietly waiting for me. My Aunt Patricia called, not to gossip, but just to listen. My cousin Ryan reached out, sharing his own stories of feeling marginalized by my parents' favoritism. We formed a small new branch of the family, one built not on obligation, but on shared experience and mutual respect. I learned that family isn't always about the blood you share, but about the people who see your scars and love you not in spite of them, but because of them. A year later, my life is unrecognizable, mostly because of how quiet it is. The frantic energy is gone. My phone no longer feels like a ticking time bomb of financial requests. My weekends are my own. They are filled with long walks through Central Park, visits to the Met, and frequent trips on the F train to Brooklyn for loud, joyful, and wonderfully chaotic dinners with the Rossis. My chosen family. A few months ago, I took the money I would have been forced to pay for that Mercedes and used it for something else. I established a small scholarship fund at my old public high school in Connecticut. It's for students from low-income families who demonstrate resilience and a commitment to helping others. It's called the Evans Fund, but it's my version of the name. A legacy not of manipulation and entitlement, but of strength and compassion. The day I signed the paperwork to create it, I felt a sense of pride that no promotion or bonus could ever match. I was building something that would last. Sometimes, late at night, I look out at the glittering lights of the city, the same view I had on that cold January evening when my world fell apart. I no longer see a city I have to conquer to prove my worth. I see a home I have built for myself. I see a life of peace. I realize now that the hardest decision of my life wasn't walking away from my family. The hardest decision was giving myself permission to be truly happy without them. And it was the decision that ultimately saved my life. Shannon, that's my story. It was a long road to find myself in the ashes of a broken family. At the beginning, I asked what you would have done. Now I want to hear from you. If you have ever felt invisible, been taken for granted, or had to fight for the respect you deserve, please share your story in the comments below. We may be strangers, but in this, we are not alone. Let's listen to each other. Let's heal together. Chante